I had an absolutely great interview with a lady named Whitney Owens. She has a podcast called Wise Practice Podcast, and she generally talks to people who have practices in counseling. But she brought me on the show to talk about some accounting and finance, and we blended all that together with some great talk about faith. And I thought I wanted to share this with you today, so I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Ask Ralph podcast, where listening to an experienced financial professional with over 30 years of experience can help you make sense of confusing questions, current headlines, and industry trends about taxes, small business, financial decision-making, investment strategies, and even the art of proper budgeting. Ask Ralph makes the complex simple by sharing his real-world knowledge from a Christian perspective with all things financial. Now here's your host, Ralph Estep Jr.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Wise Practice Podcast. On today's episode, I have Ralph Estep. He is a highly accomplished professional with a diverse background in finance, accounting, technology, and entrepreneurship. As the principal at Saggio Management Group, Incorporated, he has demonstrated exceptional leadership and expertise in various roles throughout his career. Ralph, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, well, why don't before we get going, you share a little bit about yourself, your background, your family, what you like to do for fun, just so people can get to know you better.
Absolutely. So I always say that I'm an accountant, I'm an author, I'm a farmer. I raise Black Angus cows here on a farm here in Delaware. I am married, be 24 years this September. I've got two children, one of which is 23 in May, and my other is 26. My oldest son is in the U.S. Coast Guard, serving in Galveston.
Wow.
So and I grew up in accounting. My dad has an accounting practice, so I tell people I've been doing accounting since I was about 6.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. I actually always thought I'd enjoy being an accountant. I think numbers are lots of fun.
We consider ourselves engineers with a personality.
I love that. That's a great, I'm going to tell my accountant that one. That was a good one. That's great. That's great. All right. And then you have a faith-based background with the work you do, correct?
Absolutely. I'm a member of Baptist Church here in Middletown, Delaware. But I've always grown up. I had my salvation when I was 13, and it's the character of who I am. And one of the things I talk about in my book and I talk about in my podcast is that you don't have to check your Christianity at the door when you go into the workforce. A lot of people think you've got to do that, but you don't. It's who you are. It's what makes you up. It's what your character is all about. And that's kind of what I've tried to do in my life. People know me when they come into my accounting office. I have an office here on the farm. I give away Bibles in the lobby. They may not ask about Christianity, but they're sure going to hear about it. And I don't beat them over the head with it. It's not my intention, but I consider this my mission field. And if it's my mission field, then guess what? I'm going to try to be that person for them that plants those seeds.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said it like that. I was even thinking about that yesterday when I was at church, thinking like, the work I do in helping faith-based therapists and helping clients, that is my church, right? That's where I do ministry.
Absolutely. And I think more people need to realize that your mission field is where you are. It's wherever you are. It's whatever your profession is. That can be your mission field. And you've got to look for opportunities to sow those seeds.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. So you've been an accountant pretty much your whole life, huh?
Absolutely. Like I said, I grew up in this. I graduated from the University of Delaware. Then I went on to get my master's degree. I started my own practice in 2005. So it's coming up on 20 years being in my own practice.
All right.
Also worked as the executive vice president at a credit union. I ran a law firm. I've done a whole bunch of different stuff, worked in a software company. But now I've been in private practice now for almost 20 years, and I really enjoy what I do. I enjoy helping people. So if I can help one person, then I've checked my box for today.
Yeah. Hey, that's a very good way to think about it. So today we're going to talk about what does it mean to manage your money or your finances from a Christian perspective, which I think is super important for Christian practice owners. So what are the first things that you have to say about that?
Well, I wrote a book about this called Mastering Your Finances. And in that book, I talk about first thing you need to do, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, is you need to know where your money's going. It's all about assessment. It's all about knowing where your money's going. But as a Christian, I think you've got a little bit extra to do. And that is you have a stewardship. What you've been given here is not yours. You've been entrusted with it. So you have to steward those resources. And God's looking at you and saying, how are you using those resources, Ralph? So I think that's a real key important thing. So If you're a Christian person, I think you've got like an extra layer, for lack of a better way of saying it. I think there's more expected from you. There's a
Mm.
stewardship mentality that you have to, and you have to be transparent. One of the things that's interesting in my practice is people proclaim to be a Christian. They want to come in and tell me how they're going to cheat on their taxes, how they're going to end up paying the least amount of taxes. Well, that's great. I'll help you pay the least amount of taxes, but I'm not going to let you go to tax evasion. I'm not going to let you go down a road that it just defies your Christian faith. But there's so many people that get stuck on that. It's so easy to get corrupted when it comes to money. So as a Christian, I think it's really important to know that you have to have transparency, but the key is that stewardship.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, looking at what are the things Jesus talked about the most, one of them was money because it is so corrupt, right? And then your comment about taxes, like, couldn't have been any more clear. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's.
Well, that's a fact, right? Give
Huh?
unto God what is God's.
That's
That's the
right.
second step to that.
Yeah,
And the
definitely.
discouraging part of me is I have people that come in and let's just say they're not business people, just ordinary tax people. They come in, oh, Ralph, I gave a lot to charity this year. I said, okay, what does that look like? Well, I gave $200. Well, that's fantastic. You made $200,000. I don't think you're quite hitting the tithing barrier there, are you? So that's another part of that. If to whom much is given, much is expected. And
Hmm.
if you want to be a Christian and honor your finances, then you've got to honor tithing. Support your church. If you don't have a local church, find one. If you can't find one, then find charitable organizations that will help you reach it. I just recorded my podcast that'll play next Sunday that talks about that. It's called Giving It to God. Well, he gives it to you. He lets you use it. So you've got an opportunity. You've got an obligation to use it for his kingdom.
Hmm. Yeah. Can you talk some more about stewardship? What do you mean when you use that word?
What I mean by that is you using your resources wisely, making wise decisions, not, squandering your resources.
Hmm.
The thing I see every day, and I see this every day in my practice, I do a ton of financial counseling. People have no clue where their money goes. And they get to the end of the month and they're like, oh, we can't afford to pay this. We're running up our credit cards. I just recorded an episode today on credit card debt. Do you realize that almost 50% of the US population is bringing credit card debt over from the previous month? That's not
Hmm.
good stewardship because interest rates continue to increase. The average interest rate on the credit card is over 20% now.
Mm.
And if
Yeah.
you are not stewarding your resources, then how can, if you're not doing the right things for yourself, how are you ever going to bless somebody else? So
Mm.
stewardship is all about making wise financial decisions. Well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you got to define where your money's going. You'd be
Mhm.
shocked how many people come into me and I'll say to them, look, for the next 30 days, I want you to write down every dollar and where it's going. They look at me like I'm crazy. And then they'll come in 30 days later and I say, Ralph, that was a really cool exercise. We had no clue how much we were spending on Starbucks. And I'm not picking on Starbucks. Or how much we were spending at Dunkin' Donuts is a big one here. Or how much we were spending on eating out or all those things. And I had one client come in, husband and wife were both paying for a Netflix subscription and neither one of them realized the other one was paying for it. Well, they were paying for it twice. But it's that old adage of what gets measured gets done. So that's the
Mm.
first step. And then part of that stewardship is having a budget. Saying, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay God first. If you have a Christ-centered budget, what that means is that you pay Christ first because he's given it all to you. It's not yours. You have to
Mhm.
steward those resources. It talks about in the Bible. I don't remember the exact passage of it, but he gave this one this much and gave this one this much. And one of the people said, well, yeah, I didn't do anything with it. I didn't invest it. And crazy. Wait a minute. You have a job. Your job is to grow that. Your job is to steward that. And maybe I've not done a good job of defining it, but I feel stewardship is making sure that you're doing the best with what you've been given.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the parable of the talents I think that you're referring to there.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, something I think about, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this. Yeah, I run a group practice. I have 14 therapists that work for me and a couple of admin staff. And so I definitely think about tithing, and I actually tithe out of my personal money when I pay myself, and then I tithe that. My husband's actually a pastor, so it's
Oh,
always
excellent.
that's like a whole nother topic of like it's
That's a
interesting that I
whole
give money
nother
to the
discussion.
church where my husband works.
I got several clients that are pastors, so I get that. That's a whole nother level of discussion.
Yeah, yeah, but I feel like it's important. So we give to that. But then as a business owner, I try to think about how can I give to people out of my what God has given me. And sometimes giving doesn't look like here's $100 and I'm going to give it to this. Sometimes it's offering a sliding scale to our clients or being involved in a fundraising event, or some of it is we give our time, we give our energy, all those kinds of things. So it can look a little different as business owners, how we do that.
Absolutely. And one of the things I mentioned in my podcast, like I said, recorded yesterday, was that giving doesn't mean money necessarily. It
Mhm.
means giving your time, giving service, offering. This is why I do the podcast, for an example. I said this to people. This is my mission field. I don't ask for money. I don't ask you to send me anything. I don't ask you to buy anything. I say, look, if I can help you, if I can help one person, you can do the same thing in your practice. Let's say you have somebody come into your practice and they just can't afford to pay you. Well, as a business person, I'm going to tell you, well, that's not a good person to take, right? But as a Christian, maybe you say, look, I'm going to grab so many people a year and say, look, this is going to be my pro bono, for lack of a better term, or I'm going to charge them half price. And the thing is, we want our businesses to prosper. But if you're cheating God, why is he going to let you prosper? And if
Mm.
somebody comes through the door and says, look, I really need help, and you turn them away because they don't have the money to pay you, what is the message that you're sending? Because my truth, I truly believe that when you help others, you're blessed 10 times over. I can see it in my
Sure.
own practice. I've had people
Sure.
come in, like for tax work as an example, and they'll say to me, Ralph, I'm really struggling right now. I'm a single mom. I really can't afford to pay you this fee. I could pay you half. I could pay you half later. I said, no, here's what I want you to do. Pay me half. Take that other half and take your kids out to do something, do an activity or something like that. Well, guess what happens? The next day I get 3 more clients. You tell me God's not involved in that? Absolutely he is. And he's going to reward that. It might not be immediate and it might not be what you expect, but I think there's reward in that. So I hope that answers your
Mhm.
question.
No, I think that's great. And yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said with us also just sensing the spirit. Like, how is God asking us, especially as therapists? We have all these clients knocking on our doors, needing a lot of help. We can't possibly help all of them. So, being really wise about, hey, I help some of them at a discount or a sliding scale. And then I have others that I refer out to another place that maybe does have better funding, like nonprofits in the area. They can take on a little bit more sometimes than what we can do, and just being able to, like, really come together as a community to help meet the needs of these clients.
Yeah. And the thing is, you've got to be successful in your business to support your family. So
Yep.
you can't just say, well, I'm going to do everything for free, because that just doesn't make any sense either. That's
Mhm.
why I said, if you're a good steward of your resources, if you're being effective, if you're being wise in your decisions, then that will afford you opportunities to do more things. And like you said, maybe you refer them to a local church that might have a pastor that does counseling. I know at a church we used to go to, they had a counseling pastor. And that's what he
Yeah.
did. He met with people who were having relationship issues or any of those things. And it was free. So maybe you have to look to the community. And I think that's a great thing to look at. Absolutely. But you can't put yourself in the poorhouse to do it.
Yeah. And I think it's a hard line there, right? It's a hard line. And as therapists, we tend to give too much, just to be honest. Like, that's why we went into this field. And so I'm always having to remind people, hey, like, the reason that you're not able to pay your debt off is because you're giving too much at your job. And so it is definitely that fine line to walk. And I think it all goes back to our hearts. Like, where are our hearts in our giving, and where are our hearts about our money?
Yeah. And it's all about your treasure, right? Where your heart is, your
There you
treasure
go.
is, right? And that's
Yeah.
so true. But you have to take care of you first.
Hmm.
So you've got to do that. And you got to pray about it. You got to say, listen, Lord, what is it you'll have me to do? And if you
Hmm.
shut up long enough, he'll speak to you. But that's the problem. See, we like to talk. We like to talk about, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And God laughs at us because he's, if you'd listen for a second, I'm going to give you some I pray about wisdom. To me, that's the key. God, give me the wisdom. What does this look like? But so many people don't shut up long enough to listen.
So, is there some kind of proverb about man makes his plans and the Lord laughs at him or
Yeah,
something like that?
if it's not a proverb, it definitely needs to be, right? I'm not trying to add to the Bible, but it's the truth though, isn't it? We make
Yeah.
our plans and God laughs because he's got a predestined plan for us. If we're living
Yeah.
our purpose, guess what? We're living our purpose, then God's got a plan for you. He's going to put people in front of you that need you, and he's going to put people in front of you, you need them. And
So
imagine, I've
true.
never done counseling, although I'll tell you, in my practice, I feel like a counselor someday. I say to
I'm
my
sure.
clients sometimes, let me take my accounting hat off and put my counseling hat on.
Mhm.
because it all intersects, doesn't it? Because
It sure
if
does.
you have financial problems, your marriage can be a wreck. How many times do we see I truly believe that's the biggest cause of most marital problems is finance.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll put people through all kinds of premarital counseling to talk about this and talk about that, but do we pull each other's credit reports? Do we pull each other's budgets and say, look, where do you spend your money? Because that's going to make or break a marriage. I see it every day.
Mm.
And if you don't invest in that, if you don't take the time to look at that, so I would say as a Christian counselor, maybe that's one of the things you need to broach with your clients is look, maybe you need to look at your finances. Maybe that's an area that's causing stress.
Mhm. Well, it's definitely a big part of the business consulting I do. It's number one. Let's look at that money and what's happening here. And it's all the things you said. They have no idea where they're putting it, or they're putting it into multiple things they don't need. They're not saving for taxes, which as a business owner is huge. People don't prepare for that, especially as you grow your group practice. Your income level is increasing. And so your tax payoff is high.
Yeah. And have they created the entity that works best to save them taxes?
Uh huh.
Because so many people don't want to invest in people like me. They don't want to set aside money and go meet with somebody like me. I meet with people all over the world because Zoom has opened up these doors. And I can meet with people and say, look, here's how it's structured now. There's a better way to do this. There's a better
Hmm.
tax structure. I started the beginning by saying I don't want to do tax evasion, but I will sure beat the doors of tax avoidance down because that's legal. And there are things I can
Yes.
do to help these practice people who have set up these businesses, and maybe they're set up as a sole proprietorship and they need to be an S corp, or they're set up
Right.
as a sole proprietorship, they need to be an LLC. Well, why do you say that, Ralph? Because there are ways to save on taxes that are appropriate and legal, but people don't take the time to invest to figure out what those are. And then they go to see
Hmm.
their tax guy at the end of the year. And to be blunt, my clients who come in at the end of the year, there's not much I can do for them. I can put the things on the paper, but that's not where the value is. The value is in
Right.
that tax planning that goes on throughout the year. I say to my clients in October, November, let's look at your year-to-date financials. Where do things stand? Well, it looks like you're going to owe some money. So maybe it's time to make some investments. Maybe it's time to buy some things. Maybe it's time to set up a retirement plan. How many people have retirement plans? It's sad
Not a
because
lot of therapists.
that's right. And we live in a world where guess what? Defined benefit plans like your mom and dad had working at Chrysler or working at one of these plants, they worked for 30 years. And then when they retired, they got a check every month. Guess what, folks? That's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
Your retirement is what you put into it. And if you think you're going to live on Social Security, you're going to be in trouble.
Mhm.
So imagine people in your field as well. They got to start thinking about retirement plans. Do you set up a solo 401k plan? Do you set up a SEP plan? There's all kinds of things out there. You just have to do it. And that's part of stewardship as well. You have to realize
Yes.
you're not going to be able to work every day of your life. Now, maybe you will. I don't know. But at some point, you'd hope you'd be able to retire. I see that with pastors all the time, to be honest. A lot of pastors just don't plan for retirement. And that's a sad thing. And then they looked at I've dealt with a couple pastors in their 80s. And I say to them, why are you still doing this? Well, Ralph, I didn't really set aside for retirement. And that's just
Sad.
sad. It's sad, but no one has pulled them aside and said, hey, and the problem is a lot of them opt out of Social Security, which even makes it more complicated.
That's like part of it, I think.
That's a good
I
part
seem
of
to
it, and
remember,
if they've
yeah.
not put aside for retirement, they've not done the traditional 401k thing or the SEP plan. But anyway, I didn't mean to go down a rabbit hole there, but
Yeah.
that's all part of the stewardship part. You got to steward your resources. You got to plan for the next time. You can't just plan for today. You don't live for today. That's good as a Christian. I don't want to live in fear, but I also have to plan.
Mhm. Definitely, definitely. Well, Ralph, a lot of practice owners that are probably listening are in debt because graduate school is expensive for therapists. And a lot of therapists don't make a lot of income until they really grow and can really raise their rates because we can only charge so much. And especially therapists that are on insurance panels of a solo practice, it's hard to, and they do that to help these clients. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about kind of what would you say to someone who's bootstrapping, working hard, and has all this debt from graduate school?
It's hard. It's the truth. I look at what graduate school costs now and I say, wow, how do you expect people to ever recover that?
Yeah.
It's just true. And the problem is, and I don't want to throw darts at a dartboard, but here's the problem. Colleges have figured it out. Well, they can get loans for it. So we'll just hike tuition up. We'll hike tuition up. We'll hike tuition up. And at some point, what are you paying for? I wish I had a magic trick that I could say, okay, do this, this, and this. But you know what? The problem is you're just going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to pay
Yeah.
those bills back. You take time, you do it, you build your practice. I get it. I've got some physician clients that owe five, six, $700,000 in student loans. It's like a triple mortgage payment for some people. And they'll
Mhm.
say to me, Ralph, I can't get ahead doing this. I said, I get it. I get it. I don't know what the solution is. As a country, we can't just forgive all the student debt. That's not going to work. So I wish I had a good answer. The only thing I can say is, again, pray about it. Put it into your budget. Figure out how can we start paying. The good thing about student loans is they're usually low interest rate, which is a positive.
Mhm.
That's one good thing. But yeah, it's a problem. I wish I had a magic way to, here we go, it's gone, but I don't have that.
Mhm. Definitely. Well, and what about practice owners who are growing? So maybe thinking about purchasing office space because that's a huge financial investment for your business. You have any recommendations or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you really need to have a budget. You need to plan what that looks like. And the thing I see about clients that go into new business, especially if they're building a new building or they're fitting out tenant space, a lot of people don't realize when you go rent space, you get a vanilla shell, they call it. You get four walls and a concrete floor. And you've got to think about, okay, what else am I going to need? And people don't have any concept of the budget for that. And I've
Oh,
seen a
yeah.
lot of businesses fail because of that. They have no concept of what does furniture cost? What does utilities cost? What are the other costs I'm going to have? So I think you've got to look at it. You've got to enlist the support. I call it a team, a dream team, right? You've got to have a good attorney, somebody that's going to negotiate contracts with you. You've got to have a good insurance agent, someone that's going to make sure your butt is covered, right? Because there's a lot of that kind of crazy stuff that goes on. A good accountant and probably a good coach, someone who's been down that road before. Because guess what? Coaches have made mistakes. That's why they coach now, because they know how to avoid those mistakes. And if they can help you through that process so you don't have to make the same mistakes they've made, then you're going to be that much better. You got to look at it wide open. You got to realize when you go into your own space, it's going to cost you, but you got to plan for that. And that's the whole thing. Budget,
Mm.
plan, have a contingency. What does that look like? Most people go into it like, wow, I've grown. There's no room for me. I want to bring on another counselor. There's not enough waiting room space. Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes you got to be uncomfortable for a while before you take that next step. Right? I mean, seriously,
Oh,
but that's the
yeah.
truth. How many times do you have to work extra hours? How many times do you have to do more? And you're right. At some point, if you're taking insurance, like you're restricted on how much you can charge, how much you're going to collect. I don't know. I've seen a lot of people go into concierge practices with this kind of stuff. I think that's a very good plan to go to. I think you don't burn yourself out as much. I personally use a concierge physician. I think it's great. But I
So do
think you
I.
have to be ready for that growth. And the thing is, if you add employees, you know what I'm talking about, you're adding payroll costs, you're adding payroll taxes, you're adding workers' comp, you're adding all these things. You've got to be aware what those things are before you jump into them and pro forma those out. And that's where somebody like myself can help you with that and say, okay, Ralph, here's what I'm fixing to do. What do I need to do to make this work?
Well, you're preaching my language. These are the mistakes I see people starting their group practice. They pay their people too much, not thinking about all the stuff you just said. And then they also get more office space than they need. And I at one point had 6 therapists in 2 offices. It was crazy house, but it worked until I could get more space and it was allowed to save more money for that.
And that's the thing. You have to go into it with the idea, like you may need to be uncomfortable. It's okay. But that old adage, if you build it, they will come. Well, sometimes you got to wait. And that's the thing about prayer too. Like maybe you got to wait. Maybe God's not ready for you to make that turn yet. Like you said, you had 6 therapists working out of 2 offices. Guess what? You figured it out though, didn't you?
I sure did. And I kept growing.
Yeah. And that's the key because see, you can outgrow yourself. I had a client a few years ago and I said to him, I said, you're going to outgrow yourself. And he goes, what does that mean? I said, you got so much money going out on the street. Your cash flow is going to be an issue here before long. And sure enough,
Mm.
6 months later, he was out of business because
Oh,
he too fast and he wasn't ready for what that looked like. And especially
yeah.
in the insurance market, think about that. How much time does it take to get paid by the insurance company? Well, you're fronting all those wages at the front end for your therapist, right? And you're waiting on that payment from the insurance company. Well, you better have some cash on hand to meet that payroll, to meet those utilities, to meet that rental payment. Maybe you're
Mhm.
fortunate enough you bought property, which I think is a great thing to do. Make sure you find a good realtor. Make sure you're in the right location. So, but that's my
Definitely.
take on that. You can grow too big. My grandfather used to use this term, you get too big for your britches.
Mhm.
And it's easy to get that way because we have these grandiose dreams about, oh, I got to have this great space and I've got to have this huge atrium and boy, this is going to be, yes, it will. It'll be beautiful. But are you ready for it? Can
Yeah.
you afford it?
Yeah. Well, this has been super helpful. Ralph, do you want to share a little bit about your book and how people can get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. The best way to get in touch with me is I have a daily podcast called the Ask Ralph Podcast, and that's Mastering Your Finances with a Christian Perspective. It's real easy to find. It's AskRalphPodcast.com. I also have 2 books, one of which is the first book I wrote last year, is Mastering Your Finances from a Christian Perspective. And the second one, this is my real Christian deep dive, and that's called The Gospel of Entrepreneurship, How to Walk with Jesus in Your Business. And that book will change your life and it'll change your business when you realize that you don't have to check your Christianity at the door. You can be who you are, and God will reward that, and your employees will reward it, and your customers will reward it. So I encourage you to get those books. You can get them on Amazon. You go to my website, like I said, AskRalphPodcast.com. I also encourage you to subscribe to our podcast. I do it daily. It's about 15 minutes a day. I give you real information that you can put to work. I give you action steps. I don't talk about all kinds of high and mighty garbage. For example, today's podcast I release is about PMI insurance. If you have a mortgage, you're probably paying PMI insurance unless you paid a lot down. Well, how much does that cost me? So I say, hey, ask Ralph. He'll tell you what it costs you. And are there ways to get around that? So I give you practical advice. So I hope that answers your question. But that's the best way to get in touch with me. If you want to schedule a one-on-one meeting with me, you can go to that AskRalphPodcast.com/store. You can schedule a consultation with me. I do it through Zoom if you'd like. I meet with people all over the world and I impact them. I can help them. But they got to take the first step.
That's right. That's right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to help us today. And I know people will be following up with you. And so thank you so much.
I appreciate your time too. And God bless you.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph podcast. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.